Hello, everybody. My name's Tarek Lewis, and we did our book report on Scarcity, the New Science of Having Less and How It Defines Our Life by Sendel Mullainathan and Eldar Shafir.
And I'm Dylan, and so we looked at what the definition of scarcity was, and it's defined as a state of being in short supply, whether it's time, resources, or capacity. So what we wanted to do was we wanted to look in depth at what the two authors had to say about the topic of scarcity and see how it affects us personally. So the first example he gives is of Amy Cohen, who is a chef of a famous restaurant called Dirt Candy. And ironically, after they ate there, they found out that she was going to be on TV on Iron Chef and that she was a contestant there. So they decided to watch the episode. And when they were watching the episode, they thought that she was extremely lucky because her surprise ingredient that she got was broccoli, which just happened to be the main part of the dish that they had bought the night before. But it ended up being quite ironic because the show was filmed over a year ago, and that was actually her performing under one of these scarce, pressure-filled situations where she was given broccoli and she developed that famous recipe right then and there when the time was counting down, which was something that was pretty crazy to look at given the circumstances.
So then the next section of the book dives into how scarcity creates scarcity, and the authors use the example of packing suitcases. So, for example, when you have a large suitcase, you don't really have to think twice about what you're packing. You can kind of just throw everything in that you need and have space for extra things. Like you can throw in extra stuff that you thought about like last minute or something. But then they use the example of how when you have a smaller suitcase, you're limited and you have to think more about what you're packing. And in some cases, you may have only room for like one extra item or something like that. And then they then use the idea of how that kind of relates to our everyday life. So everyone is presented in their life with a small suitcase situation. So we only have time to limit ourselves to a couple daily events that we do in our lives, where if we had a large suitcase, we'd be able to fit everything in, but that's just not realistic. And I think they did a really good job of explaining how that affects us every day.
And then the last section of the book looks at ways to remediate scarcity and try and battle against it in our daily lives. So it uses the example of St. John's Hospital. In 2002, St. John's Hospital was running at 100% capacity. They were unable to take into account other surgeries that needed to be performed other than the ones that were already scheduled. So whenever they had emergency surgeries, they had to have their staff work overtime and try and perform 2-hour surgeries that were just unrealistic given the circumstances. So what they did was they went in and they hired an analytics expert to look at what they could do to try and fix this scenario because they could just not, there was no way they could continue on doing it like this. And what the expert explained was that they should leave one room unopened, which kind of seems like a crazy thought because if they're already maximizing capacity, how do they have the room to just completely abandon one room for the time being? But the logic behind it is if you give the perform surgeries, the ones that you're planning on, all the room or the majority of the rooms, then you have them set and scheduled. But if you leave one of those extra rooms open for any of the unplanned, any of these emergency situations, it allows the doctors to be ready and be able to use that room in emergencies. And when they did this, they saw that the percentages actually went down for surgeries after 3 p.m. by about 45%, and they were able to work at a much better capacity and were able to take into account any external factors, any of those emergency situations that may or may not occur while they're at the time being.
So all in all, it was a really good book, and it taught us that scarcity is inevitable. Everyone's going to face it on a day-to-day basis, and although we can't avoid it, there are definitely ways that we could work around it and kind of make our life so it's not as stressful, and that it could help us further better our lives so that it keeps us from having to, I guess, give up stuff that we wouldn't necessarily have to if we could fit everything in our life. So all in all, it's a good book, and you guys should definitely give it a read. Thank you, guys.
Thoroughly enjoyed it.